Hello dear actors, I hope you're all keeping well in these strange times. Let me know how you're going with everything in your videos that you send me. Feel free to let me know what you're doing to keep yourselves occupied at home, and also any films that you've been watching. We normally talk about films in class, so make sure you let me know any films you've been watching and what you thought of it and what you thought of the performances. I'll be curious to hear what you're watching. So this week we are going to do an exercise to begin with called dropping in. So I think most of you will have never done this one before. It's a really cool exercise for engaging your imagination and connecting you to the text so that you aren't just saying the words, but you're speaking the words from a place that is connected to what's going on and what's being said. So it's essentially it's an imagination exercise. So I think it's really fun. I really like doing this exercise, and I do this myself as an actor when I prepare scripts. It's a really good way to start getting connected to the text. So this is an exercise that you can do as the first thing in your process for preparing for a role, if you ever have a role to do or an audition for anything. It's a really great way to start connecting to the text from the beginning. So the script we're dealing with today is Dakota and Campbell. So you'll have had that sent through to you. So we're going to go through that, and I'm going to teach you how to do dropping in on the lines from that script. Okay? So as always with these online classes, just choose whichever character you want to play. Doesn't matter which one. Doesn't have to be your gender or anything in particular. Just whatever you would most like to do. So we'll start with just a read through. So I'll just read all the lines for today's script. So INT, it starts with at the top. Does anyone know what that means? It means interior shot, i.e. that means that the film, the scene is being shot inside. So it will always say at the top of a professional script, when you have on a real film set, it will say INT or EXT. So EXT means exterior, which means outside. Simple as that. So INT, interior, we're inside. During the day, in a library. So that just sets the scene for where we are. So sometimes you'll see that on a script where it has that at the top to just set the scene for you in terms of where the scene's taking place. Okay, so Dakota is sitting in the library quietly reading. Campbell joins. Campbell, what are you doing in here by yourself? Dakota, just thought I could get some reading done. Campbell, is it for class? We only have 10 minutes left of break. Why don't you come play? Dakota, no reason. I'm perfectly fine here. Campbell, has this got something to do with Erin and her group? Dakota, look, I don't want any trouble. Campbell, it's not a big deal. They don't actually mean it. Dakota, I'm quite happy here. I'm not going to go outside. Campbell, they actually really hurt your feelings, didn't they? Dakota nods. Campbell, do you mind if I join you? So that's the script we're working with today. So I'm going to take you through the dropping in process for, let's just look at Campbell's lines. So if I'm playing the character of Campbell, actually let's do Dakota's lines because I like that there's a piece of direction that we can drop in. So if I'm playing Dakota, then I would start with, first of all, you could start with just like the interior day library part, right? Because you want to set yourself in the scene, but then the direction kind of said that as well. So it says Dakota is sitting in the library quietly reading. So for dropping in, what you want to do is you want to get really, really comfortable. So you can do this lying down, but you don't want to be so comfortable that you fall asleep. I like to do it in semi-supine, which is where a fancy word for lying on your back with your knees up in the air and your feet flat on the ground. But just however you're comfortable, so it can be in a nice comfy chair, and you just want to close your eyes, and you're going to drop into your imagination, into your mind, your lines little bit by little bit. And then you're going to see what comes up in your imagination when you drop these thoughts in, these lines in, and then you're going to write down on a piece of paper what comes up for you, yeah? So it can be anything at all that comes up for you. It might be pictures, it might be colors, it might be memories of your own, it might be films that you've seen or songs that you know, or it might be emotions, or anything at all that comes up in your imagination when you think about the line. Write it all down. So spend a little bit of time on each line or each little section of a line. So for example, let's start with Dakota's sitting in the library quietly reading. So you close your eyes and you open up your imagination, open up your mind to receive whatever is going to come. And you drop in that Dakota is sitting in the library quietly reading. So as I drop that in right now, it's coming up for me the library in my primary school, actually. I'm seeing the pit where we would sit and read, and it has this really kind of warm, friendly, fun, exciting, but kind of soft and gentle energy to it. So I would write all this down and then go back to the sitting in the library quietly reading. So now I'm seeing my own face as a boy sitting there reading, and I'm kind of biting on my lip, and I'm reading a book called Hector and Maggie, which is one of my favorite childhood books. I don't know why that's come up. And you just want to really get yourself into what that's like. And then, so I seem to have come up with kids stuff because I'm working with a kids script and I'm working with kids right now. So that might be why that's come up in my imagination. But then if I was going away and I was doing this for me as an adult, that stuff might come up, and that's really useful for me as an adult as well. But I might be more grounded in my real life, my current life, and imagine myself sitting reading a book and see the room that I'm sitting in. You know, I'd write this down, you know, me sitting in my lounge room looking out the window with the eucalyptus trees out the window. And it just really creates the essence of what that's like. So you can spend as long as you want on each line. You can spend forever on a line and really paint this whole world around each individual line that you're saying, because you want to create a really rich kind of pot that you're mixing in all this imaginative stuff, so you can really connect and bring your imagination and creativity to life when you're actually performing it. So let's move on to the next thought or the next line. So Dakota's first speaking line is, just thought I could get some reading done. Yeah? So you might want to also think about the context. What is happening around that line, and why is that line being said? Yeah? So Campbell's just said to Dakota, what are you doing in here by yourself, right? So that line might be loaded with a little bit of feeling a bit put on the spot, or a little bit embarrassed maybe, or whatever it is. So you can allow what's going on to affect what's comes up in your imagination as well. So let's drop that one in. So just thought I could get some reading done. So you close your eyes, you imagine that line in your head, just thought I could get some reading done. Drop it in silently into your mind. You might want to say it out loud as you drop it in as well. Play with both things. And then whatever comes up for you, write it all down. Yeah? I'm getting Matilda, the kids' novel by Roald Dahl, and was made into a film. So yeah, you can see that random things can come up. Films, songs, whatever it is, Often our memories are quite connected to things that spark our emotions, and so films and songs often do spark our emotions, and so that will often come up. And then, yeah, obviously any memories we have that we have an emotional connection to, they'll often come up as well. And they're really useful because you want to create an emotional connection to the text. So you can see that we're using our imagination and our emotional connection to create an imaginary world, but connect to it like as if it's real. Yeah? So, let's move on to the next line. So, Dakota's next line is, no reason, I'm perfectly fine here. Yeah? So, again, it's surrounded by a little bit of perhaps embarrassment, perhaps a little bit of being put on the spot, perhaps a little bit of being a bit frustrated or annoyed, because that's what's going on for Dakota. And so, dropping that line in, so let's start with, do that in two sections. So we've got no reason and I'm perfectly fine here. So no reason, I'm getting like an image of like just a hand being pushed out and a sign saying like no entry, because it's got that sense where she's saying no reason to try to kind of block out a little bit. That's the sense that I'm getting. So I think that's why those images are coming up for me. So you write those down, spend as long as you want on each line. Next one, I'm perfectly fine here. I'm perfectly fine here. Dropping that into my imagination. So I'm getting a beautiful field with sunshine and flowers and a creek flowing by, and so I'm getting this sense of perfectly fine and like, oh, I'm perfectly fine here. Now that may not be what's actually going on for that person, but that's part of what would come up, right? So then you might also have come up the stuff that's more about how Dakota might actually be feeling, yeah? Because she's actually had her feelings hurt, right? So maybe she's perfectly fine here as in she wants to be there, really, but it's coloured at least a little bit by the fact that she's frustrated and hurt. So allow that stuff to come up. So I'm perfectly fine here. Now I'm seeing like a crossed arms and like head shake to the side. Seeing like a chin up, turning away, that kind of pretend pushing away, resisting, yeah? Because that is what she's doing. The next line. Look, what I might do is I might switch over to Campbell's lines, just to do a couple of Campbell's lines for anyone doing Campbell. So let's go to Campbell's line, has this got something to do with Erin and her group? Okay? So, Dakota's just said, no reason, I'm perfectly fine here. Campbell's saying, has this got something to do with Erin and her group? So, in the context of this, Erin and her group, you want to think about who are these people, who's Erin and who's her group to these characters, because that will help inform the kind of stuff that comes up in your imagination. So up to you, there's no correct answer, we don't have the answer written here as to who Erin and her group are for these people, but we know that, or it seems to me, that Erin and her group have teased Dakota or in some way done something to hurt Dakota's feelings. You know, Campbell says it's not a big deal, they don't actually mean it. Yeah? So whatever it is that they've done, it sounds like they've said something that Campbell's saying they don't actually mean, but it was probably quite mean and has hurt Dakota's feelings. So, let's drop in that line. So, has this got something to do with Erin and her group? So I'll drop that in the context of this scene, knowing that Erin's probably said something mean. So I'm dropping in, I'm seeing like a little bully girl with her arms crossed, and it's quite a caricature in my head. Seeing Lindsay Lohan, probably you guys don't even know who that is. She was a child actress and now she's much older, and you know, seeing her with a posse behind her, her group behind her, you know, all looking a bit mean and tough. And then, so that's kind of the idea of like Erin and her group in this context of what Erin and her group might actually look like. But then you might want to bring your own personal element to it as well. So if I'm trying to connect to what Erin and her group might be like, then for me, I might want to think back to my childhood and were there like bullies at my school, and what, there are a group of people that I can imagine that maybe would be really mean, and so I'll close my eyes and I'm seeing James Cookson, a boy that I went to primary school with, who actually wasn't that bad but he was a little bit rough and a little bit mean sometimes. And I'm seeing him, and I'm remembering some of the memories of maybe times he was a little bit rough with people. And then I'm seeing at my high school a couple of boys who were a bit bullying, and I'm seeing them treat other people not very nicely. I remember one boy one day for some reason right now when they were mean to him, and that's dropping in. So now we're really connecting on a personal level to this idea of what it's like when someone's mean to people and when someone's saying mean things, perhaps, right? So now I can really feel what that felt like when I see Joel, this kid who was being bullied by Brett, this other kid, in that moment in year 7. I remember that moment, and I remember being like, wow, that's really mean. And so because it's an emotional connection, I really felt for this kid. It's really stuck with me, and I remember that memory fairly clearly. I remember the room that I was in. I can see his folder. It had science rules written on it, and I can see his hair and his face, and I know the position he was in. I can't quite get the position that Brett was in, but anyway, we have these strong connections to memory when emotions are involved often. And so I can use that emotion and that sense of what it's like with Erin and her group. And so then now, if I'm Campbell and I'm asking, has this got something to do with Erin and her group? I can kind of picture that kid in that moment when they bullied that kid and go, oh, has this got something to do with Erin and her group? Yeah? So I can be seeing that in my mind as I say the line. Anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. We're just doing the imagination at this point. So, let's do one more Campbell line. So it's not a big deal. They don't actually mean it. It's Campbell's next line. So that's 2 sentences. So again, we'll break that up into 2 separate sections. So closing our eyes, it's not a big deal. So I advise you do this along with me, even if you're not doing the character that I'm dropping in. It's just good to practice it. This is a good exercise. So it's not a big deal. Campbell. Closing your eyes. Not a big deal. I'm seeing shrugging shoulders. I'm seeing someone throwing their money away for some reason. It's like, it doesn't matter, throwing away, whatever. It's not a big deal. And again, I'm seeing kids just being a bit like, whatever. So a lot of this kid stuff is coming up for me because this is a kid script, right? So that makes sense. And so you might have some particular people that come up for you in your imagination you go to school with. That's great. Write all that down. See who's coming up for you. They don't actually mean it. Okay, so we'll drop that in again. Closing our eyes. So now, here's a bit of a weird one, just to give you an idea that sometimes some weird things will come up, but you can generally find that there's a connection to what's being said. So they don't actually mean it. I saw someone like patting a puppy dog. And so what that's connected to is this idea of the softness and the tenderness around how Campbell might be saying that line, right? It's trying to communicate gentleness, and that like, they're not actually mean, it's not serious, so it's actually just kind and like patting a puppy dog, right? So it's a bit of a weird one to come up. But don't judge what comes up, just write it all down, and some of it might be more useful than other stuff, and that's totally fine, but it's about creating a rich imaginary world, yeah? Okay, so I'll leave it there in terms of me actually going through it, but for your particular character, go through all of your lines and write down what comes up for you. Spend as long or as little as you like on each of your little lines, but make sure you have something for each of your lines at least. And then you go back to the top, and again you close your eyes, and this time you drop in the images that came up for you last time, so you bring them back up again. So for the, well, it needs to be, so the next step is about speaking the line. So I'll choose not the library at the start, because that's not a speaking line, that's just a direction. So let's go with, what's an interesting one? So let's go with, has this got something to do with Erin and her group, right? So just because we talked about that image before that was coming up for me about the kid being bullied, I'll close my eyes, I'll drop in, so you need to know what the line is. Has this got something to do with Erin and her group? That's quite a mouthful, so I'll see how I go. You drop in whatever comes up for you. Whatever you wrote down before that came up for you. So you might want to do one thing at a time if you wrote a couple of different things, or you might want to drop them all in together and go one at a time and drop this in and then kind of mush them all together. Up to you. This is creativity. You can find your own way to play around with it. There's no right way to do this necessarily, right? So I'm going to drop in, I'm seeing that room in year 7 where Brett said that mean thing to that boy. And I'm dropping myself into what that was like. And I'm allowing that to shift how I feel and really engaging with that image. And that I felt sorry for this boy, and I felt a sense of love and care for him. Like, oh, and so I was a bit sad. But you know, it also felt like it sparked a little bit of like, you know, the inner hero in me of like, I want to stand up for this boy. I mean, I didn't, but it sparked that sense of wanting good for someone. And so dropping all of that in, and then allow yourself, your mood to be changed and be really connected with whatever your image is or whatever's come up for you. And then speak the line out of the sensation that you've made inside you. But don't judge how the line comes out, yeah? You're not trying to think about how to say the line at all. Just speak from that sensation and don't worry about how it comes out. Even if it doesn't make sense at this point, how it comes out, that's okay. You're just playing to begin with. So I'm dropping in, I'm in the room, I'm seeing that boy. Has this got something to do with Erin and her group? So there you go. I spoke from the sensation that was inside me when I was viewing that. And then you play around with it. Say it a few different ways. Yeah? Seeing the room. Okay, now I'm dropping in the other image where I saw Erin with her little posse. And then I'm also dropping in Brett. So I'm putting it all together. I'm mixing it up. Got these images in my head. Has this got something to do with Brett? I went to say Brett, see, because I'm so connected to that image that I went to speak that truthfully as if I'm speaking about Brett. So now I need to make it about Erin. Has this got something to do with Erin and her group? Okay, great. That's just another way that it came out. So play around with it. Say it a few different ways. Play around with this. It's really fun. I think it is anyway. So go through your lines, all of your images, and drop in those images and speak your lines a few times in a few different ways. Don't judge how it comes out. Just let yourself be changed. That's the really important part. Let these images change you, yeah? Think about it. If you imagine something, if you imagine like some of your favorite things, like you imagine like the most delicious ice cream or whatever it is, that has the ability to change you. That does change your consciousness, your experience of life in that moment if you really connect to what that, oh God, that's good. Yeah? You can really be changed by it. And then if you imagine like a sad memory, like, I don't know if anyone's ever had a pet die or something like that, and you think about that and it's like, oh yeah, that was quite sad. And that can shift your mood. It can really connect you to that sadness. And you want to be careful with yourselves. You don't want to just be like, I'm just going to think of lots of sad stuff and make myself sad. It's really important that you take care of your well-being as actors. But you can just use your connection to emotions that you've had in the past in a way that you're not like trying to run away from scary emotions, but you're also not trying to gobble them all up. But you're just touching on emotions you may have had in your life so that you can bring that to the script, yeah? So go through all your lines for that and drop it in, and that's dropping in. Well done, you have that exercise now. So that's a really useful exercise for engaging your imagination. I love that exercise. So now we're going to move on to some script analysis. So you have in your script book the scene breakdown sheet, which is this thing, looks like that. So this is just a suggested list of some things that you can think about when you're doing script analysis. So feel free to think up your own things to be thinking about. I encourage that. And you don't necessarily need to do all of these, answer all of these perfectly when you're doing your script analysis. It's just a suggested list, okay? But I'll make my way through some of those. So let's just read it through again from the top now that we're doing script analysis. So we're in a library in the day. Dakota's sitting in the library quietly reading. Campbell joins. And now I'll do it without the character names. I'll just swap between characters. What are you doing in here by yourself? Just thought I could get some reading done. Is it for class? We only have 10 minutes left of break. Why don't you come play? No reason. I'm perfectly fine here. Has this got something to do with Erin and her group? Look, I don't want any trouble. It's not a big deal. They don't actually mean it. I'm quite happy here. I'm not going to go outside. They actually really hurt your feelings, didn't they? Do you mind if I join you? And that's the scene. That last line is so beautiful. So that last line is a really great example of, as a writer and as an actor performing the writer's work, you want to think about, as you get better and better at the craft of storytelling, you want to think about how can you do things in not such an obvious way, right? So, when Campbell says, "Do you mind if I join you?" that's a more subtle way of Campbell being like, you know what, I'm really sorry that they hurt your feelings, and you know what, I'm gonna be your friend and let's have a chat, and do you wanna hang out? And I wanna make you feel better, right? That's kind of like what's called the subtext underneath that line. There's so much that can be said with a line as simple as, "Do you mind if I join you?" Yeah. So Campbell could have said all that stuff I just said and made it really obvious, and that's lovely too, and that's fine. And it's not that obvious is always bad at all. But this is a really lovely example of how you can say something really simple and have so much more underneath that of what's actually going on between the characters, right? So I would suggest, it's not that Campbell necessarily has all that subtext and is being really, really amazingly sweet in that moment. It's possible you could do it a totally different way. But I would suggest that that's a little bit of the vibe going on with that last line, that Campbell is being empathetic toward what's going on with Dakota by saying, "Do you mind if I join you?" Yeah, the fact that Dakota's sitting alone in the library reading and Campbell even goes up to her and asks about what's going on and asks about Erin and they really hurt your feelings, didn't they? It suggests some level of care, right? That Campbell actually cares about Dakota. So it would make sense that Campbell's saying, "Do you mind if I join you?" Not just to be like, "Oh, I feel like reading," and like, "Is it okay if I sit here?" Yeah? And that's a more boring version of the scene anyway, right? So generally we want to be guided in our decisions in script analysis by what's interesting, what makes the scene interesting, what makes you go, "Ooh, I want to play that, that's really exciting," yeah? Yes, good. Okay, so let's do some script analysis. So you want to think about, first of all, like a summary of the scene, what's going on in this scene. So Dakota has been teased by Erin and her group and is now sitting alone in the library reading. Campbell approaches Dakota and questions her about, or him, doesn't matter about gender, about how they're feeling in response to what has happened with Erin, and tries to connect with her and perhaps make it less bad and make her feel a bit better, right? Not much of the feeling better necessarily comes in this scene, but I would say that there's certainly something there, like that last line, as I said, I think is the action or the intention on that line, I think, could really be to connect with Dakota, to make her feel better, whatever lovely things. That's how I'd probably play it anyway. So that's what's going on in the scene. So what world are we in here, right? So we're in primary school world, kids, bullies, it's just like, what kind of world are you in? As it says in the scene breakdown, it says hospital world, lawyer world, crime world. So they're just some examples of like worlds that you can exist in. That just gives you a sense of where this scene is taking place in terms of the environment. So, location is kind of also part of that. It's just like, where are we physically? We're in a library. So again, that's important because location can inform how the scene is performed on a subtle level or on a pretty obvious level. Like a library is a great example because the location of a library changes how you act, doesn't it? When you're in a library, you can't just be running around screaming and making a whole lot of noise. A library is a place where you have to be quiet, and so you can't be yelling this out. So you might even want to have the volume of your voice be a bit quieter and be more like, what are you doing in here by yourself? Yeah? Rather than, hey, what are you doing in here by yourself? Because we're in a library, so location matters. So conflict, what's the problem? So the problem really is that Dakota's feeling upset and hurt by what's going on with Erin, and Campbell is trying to kind of pierce that armor that Dakota has up, because Dakota is like, no reason, I'm perfectly fine here, look, I don't want any trouble, kind of pushing away Campbell. And Campbell's trying to get closer to Dakota, right? So that, I would say, is the main problem or conflict in the scene, is that Dakota's hurt and so has put up armor because that's what people often do when they're hurt. And it's such